Welcome, welcome. This is the Benjamin Dixon Show. I'm Nick for a special edition. We have with us today Thomas Frank. You know, I really like some of the things that Thomas Frank has come out with, and I just want to give him some time to go ahead and introduce himself to our audience here at the Progressive Army.
Hey guys, it's me. It's Thomas Frank. What should I say? I write books. I've written a new one, Listen, Liberal, where I finally, sort of examine what the Democrats are like in a sort of sociological sense.
Yeah, I remember reading your book, what was that? What's the Matter with Kansas?
Yeah,
And The Wrecking Crew.
yeah.
And so now I'm reading this last one, Listen, Liberal, and I think those books kind of helped me make my transition. I read so many books during that time period, but your books are amongst some of my favorites, especially the last one and the first one.
Well, thank you.
Those two especially stick out. I reread those, very, very often.
Yeah.
But you talk about Listen Liberal, and you just said you're examining the Democratic Party more so in a broader sociological sense. Like, what kind of led you to go down that path?
Well, a lot of it was that I felt like, looking back at all of these earlier books I'd written about conservatism, that I would always have a final chapter in the book where I would say, and a lot of this criticism would apply to the Democrats as well. It'd always be this little chapter that I would stick on at the very end. And I finally just decided, enough of this. Let's say what I mean. Let's come out and say it and explain why I think that.
Yeah, I really thought, I was like, oh, this is perfect because, the paradigm of Democrats being the party of the people and Republicans being the great evil, that paradigm is so very strong. Why don't you just kind of starting back from inside of the book, you talk about how they switched after the George McGovern commission.
Yeah. So the Democrats decided back in the late 60s and the early 70s to change the kind of party that they were. It's a really interesting time. A lot of stuff was going on, and they basically, what they did, to make a very long story short, and the McGovern Commission did a lot of good things, by the way. These are the people that we have to thank for the primary system. Well, actually, I say we have to thank them for it. It's so messed up, It's such a screwed up system. But anyhow, it was an improvement over what they had before. But one of the things that they did, sort of, I don't want to say inadvertently, it wasn't out in the open, but they did it deliberately, and that was to remove organized labor from this sort of position of power in the Democratic Party. And you understand why they did it at the time. I mean, this was the late 60s and the early 70s, and organized labor looked pretty conservative. These were very white organizations. These were not particularly democratic organizations, and they also a lot of them supported the Vietnam War. And so that's why they did what they did. What they didn't understand at the time was that when you do something like that, when you remove working people's organizations, from their position in the party for whatever reason, you also wind up over the long term removing the voices of working people. And that was the mistake that they made, and they've never really turned back from that. They decided back then that they were going to be. And by the way, interrupt me. You should tell me to shut up because I have a tendency to talk too much.
Well, historians, generally do, but guess what? You're saying some very, very, very important stuff, so by all means.
Okay, so they decided at the same time that they were making this choice about organized labor, they decided at the same time that what they really wanted to be was not a party of working people anymore, but a party of the professional class. That's the group that they really admired in the early 70s, and they continue to admire them. And they produced the Democratic Party produced all this literature in the 70s and the 80s and up into the 90s about how the professional, the sort of highly educated, affluent, white collar class was really the group that they needed to reach out to. And it remains that to this day. So today, when the Democrats talk about all the different groups, the constituencies that are in the Democratic tent, and organized labor is still there, but they don't really call the shots anymore. And they have other groups. They have minorities. They have the young, but it's upper class, or I'm sorry, what would you say, white-collar, affluent professionals. That is the number one group. These are the people that come first. They get listened to. You know, these are people, by the way, who are very happy with the Democratic Party. They don't get, like, upset about what's going on right now.
Let me key in on something that you said almost at the very beginning. You said they remove organized labor, and we all understand that because the labor is just really not there like it used to be, and we can see in our political system where they've been relegated to like a side role almost. But you said something even more important that I don't think people understand is that back in the 60s and 70s, even the mid 70s and whatnot, organized labor was very, very conservative.
Yeah.
And I think when we play back the election of George McGovern and how it goes down, the mythos behind that, why don't you kind of talk about how the organized labor played into his downfall?
Oh, that's a story I don't. They did. The thing is that they didn't really help him out. It wasn't that they brought him down. It's that they lost interest in him, and this is a recurring problem. George McGovern was not a bad guy. If you look at what he said and what he stood for on paper, he looks like an ideal kind of liberal. I think he was he was plagued by every kind of problem that can happen to a presidential candidate. Everything went wrong for this guy. But he had a bad relationship with organized labor for all sorts of different reasons, and they didn't help him. They basically, in 1968, organized labor had really worked hard for the Democrats. Remember, that was the year of Wallace. And so they were doing everything they could to stop Wallace. They were very frightened by Wallace. And but in 72, they were very, they were all angry. They were pissed off at the way they'd been treated. And so they didn't really help him out very much, and he went down in a sort of ignominious defeat. But he did do well with this, with the white collar, what they called at the time the suburban liberals, the white collar professional class. He did very well with this group, and that was the sort of the beginning of the transformation of the Democratic Party. And you said how organized labor is not a big force in American life anymore. That's true. I'm older than you. When I was growing up in the 70s. Organized labor was this huge part of everyday life in America. If you had a blue ribbon commission, a certain number of the seats had to go to labor unions, right? If you had a town celebration in your town, wherever it was, they had to, organized labor had a presence. If you had a parade, they had a float in the parade. It was that kind of thing. They were just part of civic life in America, and they've completely disappeared. Not completely, but they have largely disappeared. And a big part of that is because their traditional political ally, the Democratic Party, really doesn't give a damn about these guys anymore. They don't lift a finger to help them out. I'm sorry, I'm being really blunt there, but
no, I think that is critical to understand that that switch was made, and then you look at where labor is today and how they have so little influence, but yet you still see them lining up behind the Democratic Party time and time again.
Yeah, well, they're terrified. They're like so many of us. They're scared of the Republicans. Like you take a guy like Scott Walker, up in Wisconsin. He terrifies them. And so they feel like they have no choice. And by the way, when you talk to these guys, to the leadership of labor groups, and it's not always guys, but when you talk to the leadership, they're very they feel like they've been abused by the Democrats. They say we give them all our money every 4 years. We turn over the treasury to these guys. Our members go out and work really hard to get them elected, and then they don't give us anything. And then we say, here's our one issue, and they just let it drop. They don't do anything. And that should sound familiar. Because it's familiar to me. This is what they do with liberals. This is what they do with so many groups, because our fear of the Republicans is greater than our willingness to stand up to the Democrats. Right now, everybody, it's like you said at the start, the Republicans are so frightening that we really don't have anywhere else to go for a lot of us. It's not just a metaphor.
I understand that that's how people view the situation. I don't agree with it because I believe in competitive democracy.
Yeah, there you go. Of course.
If you're stuck in that, if you're stuck in that kind of situation, it almost seems like it's like you're a captive constituency, so to speak. And
But
I think
that's exactly right, though. That's where we are, man. That is exactly right.
but you mentioned the professional class,
Yeah.
and they're the people the Democrats listen to and they're supposedly for. So what differentiates how the professional class kind of views politics and views the system or the structure of our society versus, your ordinary working class person views it?
It's okay. So it's professionals tend to be. This is just a sociological definition here. Tend to be very liberal on like culture war issues. On all sorts of issues that are, that you read about in, say, the New York Times. They're very good on these things. They tend to be very conservative on economic issues because, as I said before, they're very affluent people. This is the top 10% of the income distribution. And one of the things that's kind of fascinating about these guys is that, we wonder why the Democrats don't really care about or don't do very much about income inequality. This is the great problem of our time, as President Obama has said so many times. Why aren't they, mobilized about this? Why aren't we doing all sorts of things about this? And one of the reasons is that this group that I'm describing, the professional class, has done real well in the years of inequality. They're the top 10%. They're doing great. They're not the Koch brothers. They're not the Walton family. They're not the people at the very top. But a lot of them are doing extremely well. And so, yeah, they tend to believe in markets, and they believe in expertise, and they believe in an economy. The economy is run by people who have advanced degrees. They look at Wall Street and they say those are sophisticated people. It's right and correct for them to be running the economy, and this is, by the way, so you can once you understand this, you start to understand why Democrats have done some of the weird things they've done in the last since the days of the Clinton administration right up to now. I mean, why do they bend over backwards to be so nice to Wall Street? And one of the reasons is because the kind of professional class Democrats who are in the administration and were in the Clinton administration and will be in the Clinton administration to come, they look at Wall Street and they say, that's me. Those people are my classmates. Those are my peers. Those are my people. There's no way, when someone like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren says these people have rigged the system, or these people are crooks, or whatever it is. There's like, your average professional class person is like, no way. That's just so much hot air. That can't be true. These are experts.
But you said something interesting here. You said that this is the top 10%. So that's still, even though, the people who are the affluent or whatnot, they're still only 10%. If you look at the demographics in the election, I say she, but Democratic establishment personnel are still able to garner a lot of support from the poor.
Oh yeah.
So
well, they're better than the Republicans, right? Yeah, at the end of the day, right?
I guess the captive constituency comes to captivate us once more, right? Not to be funny, but
but that's exactly right. But there is this group that they're losing, that they've been losing for the last 40 years now, which is the white working class, and particularly the white working class men. And and I wrote about this in What's the Matter with Kansas, and it gets worse and worse and worse every 4 years, and now it's you look at the Republican Party, it's out of control now.
Let me break in right there, because you bring that up and you made it a big point in your book. But this is how I knew you were on to something, because all of a sudden when people start paying attention to that, now there's all these people, there are all these numerous sources trying to muddy the waters and obfuscate that truth. They're saying, well, if you look at the polling or the demographics, that's actually not what's happening, and blah blah blah. And and I think that's when I knew, because Thomas Frank is really on to something, because everybody seems to be trying to disqualify.
Yeah.
What
there's
you
a lot
said.
there's a lot of bad conscience there, and a lot of bad faith over the years, and a lot of professional class liberals. Look, this is a party that has promised all sorts of things for decades and hasn't delivered on them. You go back and look at Bill Clinton, who's kind of the bad guy in Listen Liberal. I still, I look at Barack Obama, and that's a guy that I have a kind of, I like him. I like him at a kind of at a personal level. I mean, I don't know the man, but I feel like I would. You know what I'm saying? I would like him.
He has some charisma.
Yeah, and Bill Clinton has that too. But you look at the things that Bill Clinton did, and they're so profoundly bad. So if you look at how Bill Clinton was elected in 1992, he was talking about inequality. He was talking about the same things we're talking about now. The problem wasn't as bad then as it is today, but it was there. Everybody was angry about it, and he was out there on the campaign trail talking about it all the time. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And these guys will do anything to not have to take an issue like NAFTA. Okay, NAFTA. This is bad conscience in the biggest way. Okay, this is something that it was a Republican trade deal negotiated by George Bush Sr. But George Bush couldn't get it through Congress, right? Because Congress at the time was controlled by old school Democrats. So Bill Clinton comes in, he gets it done. And it's the whole Clinton show. It's him and Rahm Emanuel is his right-hand man, the Democratic Leadership Council. All these guys are in there, they get it, they do everything in their power, and they get it through Congress. And it was, for Clinton, it was his greatest moment. He was so proud of this because he had showed labor who's boss. He had beaten the traditional Democratic Party, and he had done it in service of this new ideology, neoliberalism, where you're sort of liberal on these social issues, but you believe in markets and you believe in free trade and all this sort of thing, and labor is out and all that. And this is not a good thing to do. He doesn't just insult his main constituency, working people. He injures them. He hurts their movement. He hurts their wages. He hurts their ability to make a living. It's really bad for these people, and he's proud of this. He's proud of what he did. But they have never been able to face up to the consequences of this. And NAFTA was just the first. There have been so many of those deals.
Let me break in for a second right here.
Yeah.
This is what's super important is you're talking about NAFTA and what its actual effects were, but you will have them to this day. Like you just said, they never own up to it, and you will find policy wonks muddying the waters on what actual good policy was, or making up excuses for why it was passed or why it's not failing. But if you remember back at the time, Bill Clinton, when he was working to get that thing through, all the media was in a love affair with him. And and even now, after we've seen the results of that presidency, they still keep talking about it in this almost like a Reagan-esque reimagining of what actually happened during his presidency. But cool, go ahead.
You put your finger on something that's exactly right. They can't talk straight about this. Have you noticed this? They can't. No. They can't talk straight about it.
No.
About what they promised, what it actually delivered, who was right in their predictions, who was wrong in their predictions, and to this day. And I will often bring this up with other Democrats, and I'll say, this issue, you really made a big mistake here with NAFTA. You made a lot of working people really mad. They stayed home, and look, the party has gone downhill ever since you lost Congress in '94. It's been disaster after disaster, and now look at Trump. Look at this guy. But it's not just Trump. I mean, every presidential candidate in the last 8 years has promised to do something about this. Obama himself promised it in '08 that he would renegotiate NAFTA. Bernie Sanders, of course, is hitting it, and is hitting home runs with this thing. And he's doing so well with it that Hillary Clinton has to, distance herself from it now. But none of them can admit that this was a mistake.
And more on top of that, it seems like if they win election, when they don't do anything about it, they say, well, they never said they were going to do something about it. Or,
right.
And Barack Obama's term was, I never campaigned as a progressive. I never said I was a progressive. He never campaigned like that. But if you go back and listen to his speeches, it sounds very highly progressive to me.
Yes.
And I think he beat Clinton by feigning progressivism.
Yes, of course.
He'll never admit that, and you'll have a million people making excuses about it.
Yes, and you're talking about a lot of bad faith there as well, with people saying, "Oh, I knew he wasn't progressive all along," or people saying, no, and he never promised anything, and everybody just projects their own views onto him. And look, that is true to a certain degree. A lot of people do project their own views onto him, but he did campaign as a progressive. He gave so many speeches like that back in. So I'll tell you. So I was an enthusiastic Obama supporter in '08, and one of the reasons was I was so happy to see the Democratic Party get wrested away from the Clinton faction. And Hillary obviously represented the Clinton wing of the party, and here's Obama coming in, and he's going to bring in all new people. I thought, we're going to get all new people. It's going to be great. And he comes in and he brings in the same people. I couldn't believe that. Rahm Emanuel is back. Hillary Clinton is Secretary of State. Larry Summers is running economic policy. Tim Geithner's in there. It blew my mind. But the other thing is, so I knew that he had that centrist side to him, that he liked to, he gave his famous speech at the convention in '04 about, there is no red America, there's no blue America, we're all in this together. And I was like, yeah, that's sappy. But he also has this other side where he's very smart and he's very sharp and he can tell Wall Street, he knows what's the matter with Wall Street and he's going to do the right thing and all that stuff. I thought he was doing the centrist bipartisan stuff just to sort of reel in the suckers. I thought that was just the boilerplate. I had it exactly wrong. It was the other way around. He was reeling it in. That's the stuff he meant, right? It was the liberal, the progressive stuff was just to reel in the suckers. It was to reel in me.
Look at you, just turned red about it.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I still get worked. I'm not worked up. It's in the past, and I'm over it. But we have to understand it if we're gonna not, if we want to move ahead.
Okay, I've been told by my producers that my mic is going.
Yeah, your mic is. Yeah.
Can you still hear me?
I can make out what you're saying, but yeah, the sound's real bad.
So, if you could answer this one last question, I'm gonna fix that while you're speaking there. Talk about the complexity. Talk about how the complexity is seen as a virtue.
Okay, so the complexity. I was trying to understand. Obama has two big achievements as president. Let's put the stimulus aside, which was his third big achievement. But the two big achievements, Obamacare and Dodd-Frank, and they have something in common. I mean, they have a lot of things in common, but the thing that's most striking when you look at it is the complexity of these things. They're enormous pieces of legislation that almost nobody understands. Dodd-Frank, for example, is still, to this day, it's not completely written. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this is a kind of motif of Obama's presidency, is this embracing complexity, unnecessary complexity. Like setting up a national healthcare system didn't have to be massively, massively complex. Re-regulating Wall Street could have been done in a very, very simple manner. You didn't have to do this. Dodd-Frank is now 20,000 pages, and it grows every day. As they add more loopholes to it and more exceptions and clarify the new rules and all this kind. It goes on and on and on. These are pieces of legislation that nobody can understand. And what you finally get is that the Obama people view complexity as a positive good. This is a feature. This is not a bug. This is a feature. And I was thinking about this when, one of the things about his presidency, Obama's presidency, that has really annoyed me is their failure to prosecute anybody on Wall Street for all the stuff that went on during the last decade, during the housing bubble, this kind of insane epidemic of fraud. And I was talking to, and they've said why they don't prosecute so many times. Like it's what the Wall Street people were doing was so sophisticated we couldn't understand it. It's so complex. It's financial rocket science. I was talking to a friend of mine who's an old school bank regulator. He had a hand in prosecuting a lot of S&L executives back in the 80s, and he said that in his day, when they, in the old days of bank regulation, when they would look at what a bank was doing and they would see unnecessary complexity, like what we saw in the 10 years ago with all these, these financial instruments that nobody could understand, the credit default swaps, stuff that really nobody got. Not even the people that were trading in them really understood these things. When they saw stuff like that back in the 80s, they would say, aha, fraud. Whenever a bank is doing undue complexity that they don't need, that's almost certainly fraud. And so when they saw that, they would zero in on it. That's a red flag.
It's not necessarily the complexity per se, right? It's more so that
no, it was a giveaway. It was a tell.
Complexity allows them to hide things and do things otherwise that if you did it in a regular way that's easy to understand, everybody would understand it to be fraud. So complexity is a way to kind of obfuscate and muddy the waters on what's going on.
And yes, that's right. And what I didn't realize is that complexity is for the professional class. This is a central thing. So for the people, the kind of like smart Harvard lawyers in the Obama administration, they look at the same thing, at this financial complexity, and they say, oh, sophistication. That's not something bad. That's something good. And they look at Obamacare, the complexity in Obamacare. It allows them to have it both ways. You can both bring the poor into the system, and you don't have to put the insurance companies out of business. And you can get big pharma; they can get a cut of the action too. And but they love this. They love these solutions that nobody can understand. Okay, I talk too much.
No, I think that is. I mean, you're hitting we are almost one mind on this thing, But let me ask you a question. Seeing where our politics are today, seeing where we're going, what would you say would be a strategy to try to reverse the trend?
Well, we're in such a difficult situation now. I had a lot of hope for Bernie Sanders. I was excited by Bernie Sanders, but I always knew he was a long shot. I mean, from day one, I think everybody knew that. But he has shown that there's a way out of this situation. We've got, on the one hand, we've got Trump, who's kind of frightening and crazy, and then on the other hand, we have Hillary, who's uninspiring and is going to change nothing. I mean, she as good as says this, right? She'll come up with another program, right? Whatever it is. But other than that, no, nothing is going to change. She's very happy with the way things are. She says she's against NAFTA now, but you watch. She doesn't mean that. Everyone knows it. Nothing is going to change, and this is deeply frustrating to me. But I think that now I understand. I think we all understand why this is. There is a huge part of the American public whose voices are just tuned out, and it's working people. We bring them back into the process, and automatically things will start to go back in the other direction.
We actually have some great questions from some of the viewers. I would love to ask just all my questions, but we like to include some of our viewers into the conversation. So let me ask one of these questions here. I think the last one I asked was a question from them as well, just to point that out. But a question here is, what do you think about the people that are doing the Bernie or bust, or people who are just trying to shake off being a captive constituency? Well,
I understand their motive. And every 4 years, or every 8 years, it's the same thing. And people are, once you commit to a candidacy like Bernie's, and you're really into it, and and you've gone to the rallies and this kind of thing, it is very hard to realize that that you're probably going to be stuck with Hillary Clinton. I'm so sorry to say that, but I mean, this is the name of the game. The game itself makes me so angry, But we are stuck with it right now. We're stuck in it, We are captives that is the problem. Look, you don't want me to go on my whole thing about third parties?
Well, actually, one of the questions actually was a third party. I am of the firm belief that we have to make the Democrats compete for the left.
Yeah.
If they don't compete for the left, if they have a monopoly on it, we're stuck, and they have the power in the relationship.
Oh, by the way, that's you saying we have no power in the relationship is exactly right. Because have you ever looked at the way they treat the left? And I'm talking about guys like Rahm Emanuel here. I mean, or who was Obama's first press secretary. Remember the incredibly contemptuous things they would say about people on the left. I mean, unbelievable things, because it's a kind of psychological relationship that they have with us. Uh, uh, it's an abusive relationship, and they don't like it when you say, no, Democrats, we don't want you to do that. We want this guy over here instead of the person that you've chosen for us, and they go crazy. That makes them, but they go crazy in a very predictable way, and it's an abusive way. They act like they are entitled to our vote. That's what they think. It's like, how dare you, say you're going to vote for somebody else? It's utterly contemptuous. Whereas you look at the right, or the Republican Party, I should say, and they live in fear of the right wing, terror. That the right wing is going to primary them, or is going to do something mean to them, or it's this opposite relationship with them.
How do you think we can actually change the nature of that relationship?
Well, I think going with Bernie, that was a strong challenge to the Clinton wing of the party. That is the first thing that has to happen, and I'm glad that happened. But there need to be challenges all up and down the ticket. That has to happen everywhere, and at some point you have to build outside of the DNC kind of orthodox party. But to get back to third party, I love third parties, and in the 19th, well, I don't love them anymore, but in the 19th century, there used to be third parties all the time. And when the two parties would ignore some problem, you'd have a third party that would spring up and challenge them. The classic example is the slavery issue. The two main parties ignored it. The Republicans grabbed that issue and broke the two-party system apart, and are a enormously successful party. Okay. And then you had another example in the 1890s where the two parties are ignoring what we today call inequality, but what you call back then,
Gilded Age.
Yeah, the Gilded Age, the industrial problems. Every monopoly, inequality, the rich, the 10%, the 1%, whatever you want to call it. Everything is going wrong, in this society. So you had the populist party that sprang up all over the West and the South. And they got absorbed into the Democratic Party. They were huge in my home state of Kansas. They were kind of it was a farmer labor sort of party, and they were big in Kansas. They were big all over the place. And what happened though, after populism died down, the two parties passed laws in every state except for a handful. In almost every state, they passed laws making the techniques that third parties used to use illegal. So the things that third parties used to do in the 19th century are now illegal. And that's why you can't have a robust, party system, because third parties are an important part of it, and now they're off the table. Because if you set one up now, you wind up as Ralph Nader. You wind up being a spoiler. Or you have to – I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you said something very, very important. They have power, and they actually change the laws to kind of negate or limit challenges from the left, so they don't have to deal with it. They sort of create a monopoly.
Yeah,
so
they have a
right?
Monopoly is the word. Yes, they have a monopoly, and it is enshrined in law. It's the most amazing thing, and I mean, it's de facto enshrined in law. Let me put it that way. It's a little more complicated than what I'm saying right now.
Ballot access being chief among it, right?
Yeah, well, that's a big part of it. Yeah, but you also. You can't. So what they used to do in the 19th century is the third party would join forces with one of the main parties. Like in Kansas, the Democrats were just a tiny little party, and so the populists joined forces with them and were able to win. And in the South, they joined forces with the Republicans, who were the smaller of the two main parties, and that's against the law now. And so the big problem with the third party is the spoiler problem. You don't want to ruin the candidate closer to you. So, but the old law, in the old way they used to do this, you could get around that problem. You can't anymore. That's all I'm saying, and that's made it very difficult. This is a long-winded way of saying that you basically have to work within the system now.
I completely understand. When you said an abusive relationship, I remember Benjamin Dixon. This is his channel. This is his. Basically the platform here at the Progressive Army. He speaks about the relationship with the Democratic Party as a progressive, as an abusive relationship. And they want
that's exactly right.
But they don't want to give us anything, and they think that basically that the power's on their side and they can do whatever they want, and you've got no choice.
That's
And
right.
I've always
They are entitled to. They are entitled to your vote.
yes, yes. If Hillary Clinton doesn't win election, it will be Bernie Sanders'
Yeah.
supporters' fault,
Yeah,
not
that's
her
right,
own
that's right.
fault.
Exactly. It's not her fault.
It turns
It's yours.
yeah. I
Isn't
told
that
someone
great?
else it's like
Isn't that
turning
great?
accountability upside down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But here's something else I want to go back. I also have my own personal crusade against what I call meritocracy, and I
Yeah.
think when you look at like classical descent, it's all over the place where they talk about it, but it's almost like completely out of our discourse. Talk about that, and particularly amongst the economics profession. That'll probably be the best one.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, meritocracy, that's, the idea that the people on top are on top because they're the best. They're the most talented. And Republicans have a version of this, the Ayn Rand version, where the people on top are, these super entrepreneurs, these fantastic businessmen who have, done these great feats of whatever. But the Democrats have their own version of it, where the people on top are on top because they're so smart. They went to good schools, and they believe in this very profoundly, that who you are, how you succeed in life is a reflection of how smart you are, and that's manifested in how you did in school. How you did in school is very, very, very important to them, and so they have this kind of very Ivy League sort of meritocracy. And by the way, Ivy League is not a metaphor for people at top schools. That's really who they choose, people that went to these very particular colleges.
No, I'm in 100% agreement with you. I think that is what kind of opened the way for us to take critique from the right as being elite. I've heard the right call people on the Democratic side elitist or elite, but
they're
when you have
right
your blinders
sometimes.
on, it's hard to see. When you look at it objectively, what they're saying is 100% correct. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just had to get
No,
that
but
in there.
you're right. Yes, they are an elite. And you look at Obama's cabinet, or you look at Bill Clinton's cabinet, or you look at the Hillary Clinton cabinet this time next year, and it's all these people from Harvard, and it's all these people who went to Oxford in England. And what's fascinating, what they don't realize when they do this, and they say, by the way, I was very enthusiastic for this approach when Obama came in, because the Bush people were so stupid, Remember Michael Brown? Remember that after Hurricane Katrina?
Oh, jeez.
So when Obama came in, I was like, awesome. We got a smart guy, went to Harvard Law School, and he's going to bring smart people into the government. He was a professor at the University of Chicago, Obama was. I was so happy about this. And he brought in Larry Summers, who was the president of Harvard, and in the most important question that we had, what to do about Wall Street, basically nothing changed. So you go from stupid people to smart people, and nothing changes. And so that was sort of the beginnings. That was the germ of Listen Liberal, when I was trying to understand that. And what I finally realized is that these people are a class unto themselves. This is the professional class. These people at the very top, that's who they are. And if you were to just, say, modify your approach just slightly, like, say, how about you don't choose anybody from Harvard? You choose people from all different parts of the country and all different walks of life. Obama would have had such a different perspective on things. For one thing, you wouldn't have had this crazy problem where all of the people in his cabinet are friends with people from Wall Street, and they themselves worked on Wall Street for a couple of years. Hey, it was just a summer job. I just picked up a couple million, like Rahm Emanuel, just there for a short time, Larry Summers, I only worked there for a little while, but they all did, and they all were, colleagues of these people. These people were familiar to them.
It's almost as if, it's like a clique, like they're a part of a clique, and they all think the same.
That's
they all
it.
represent a same worldview, not having a different experience. It's just kind of like that's their class. That's their class. The people
That's
at the top
exactly
are their
right.
class of people, and so they're going to take care of that, or they're going to see something for, from that perspective, so to speak.
Exactly.
It's from all universities.
They automatically have this sympathy towards the people they think of as their peers, right?
Or people they just identify with in general, right?
Yes, exactly. And I'm sorry. Now I forget where I was going with all this. I mean, but this is the core of what I'm getting at in Listen Liberal. This is what it's all about. These people act as a class. God, I haven't eaten dinner yet.
Oh, and I'm sorry. You know what? We only have like 5 minutes left.
Okay, I
So
can make it. I can hack it. I can hack it.
so I'm going to take some time and then ask. So, being the situation being what it is, do you think it's easier to build a new party or still struggle to try to take it over from within?
It's got to be. I think Bernie has answered that question for us because, Ralph Nader, was campaigning, was saying a lot of the same things as Bernie, and went down to disaster in this kind of horrifying way in 2000. But
I was going to say, let me interject right there. But remember, the problems that the problems in our country during Ralph Nader's time were not as severe as they
that's
are
right.
now.
No, that's exactly right. Everything's gotten much worse.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. Everything's gotten much worse since then. But Bernie, so I interviewed him in 2014, and he was debating whether or not to run as a Democrat or as an independent, to do like Ralph Nader did. And he chose, obviously, to run as a Democrat. But look at the success he's had. I mean, the New York Times is running op-eds, 2 or 3 op-eds every day denouncing this man. The Washington Post is like, he's on the front page every day. They're so angry at him. It's amazing what he has done just by running in the Democratic primaries.
Okay, so I guess I take that as a take it over from within is the proper strategy then.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's the only way to go nowadays. But once we get in there, I want to change the laws about third parties. I would like to see third parties again. I think that would be a blast.
So I see what you're saying. You get in there and you play that game, but once you have any sort of victory, what you need to do is change the landscape.
Yes.
Such that it's not tilted in that way anymore, so you can open up new avenues, right?
Yeah. Oh, there's all sorts of things you could do once you actually were able to have once you have the power. I mean, there are a lot of things I thought Obama would do. For example, bringing back labor unions. They've died in this country. You bring those back, and it would change the face of this country in no time at all.
And what I want to point out is Democrat after Democrat has promised card check, has promised repeal. Well, nobody's promised repeal of the Taft-Hartley Act, but people have talked about
They used to promise that. They don't anymore, but they used to.
Yeah, but people, they talk about card check and expansion of labor unions, but every time nothing ever comes out of that. And I know we only have 2 minutes left, but I want to see if you could possibly hit on the economics profession and what's going on with economics.
Well, this is the economics profession is an example of professionalism at its most corrupt. So professionalism, they think, we're the experts, we're the people on top, and we have this academic discipline to prove it. But once you start doing the research in this, what these disciplines are, these academic disciplines, and by the way, I have a PhD. I used to spend a lot of time in this kind of environment. These disciplines are clubs for keeping out unorthodox points of view. It's a way of keeping out certain points of view. And economics is the most notorious because the people who are the insiders and the ones who control the profession are wrong on everything. They predict things that never happen. They say things that will never happen, and then they do happen. They constantly get everything wrong. They give bad policy advice. They're terrible at their job, but they control the discipline, and they keep other voices out. Fascinating.
And even more than that, they also made it a lot more complex than it used to be. If you read classical economics, if you read it, it's not calculus 2, it's not ordinary differential equations. There's not these difficult models that are way beyond crazy, and you really have to sit down and really try to work things out. That's an entirely new invention.
And you know why they did that? They did that deliberately. They did it deliberately, is to have a barrier to entry. We keep talking about monopoly here, but that's what this is. They build a barrier to entry, make it hard for outsiders to get in. And that's what the math is for. And I'm not being cynical about this. That is true.
Yeah, I think pretty much. I know we had a short interview because we had technical difficulties. I want to thank everybody for coming. Tom, if you would go ahead and say who you are and your book, and then how people can contact you.
Its name's Thomas Frank. The book is Listen Liberal. I have a website, tcfrank.com, or you can find me on Facebook.
All right, thank you guys. Very nice. We're gonna be shutting it down so Ben can come on and start his show at 8 o'clock. I really appreciate you coming on. I would love to have you again.
Hey, anytime. It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.